and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and I'd like to welcome you to part two of a discussion I started last week, which dealt with the power of of Black people and economics, and how we are utilizing it. Are we utilizing it correctly? Last week, I don't have that image, but I used the image of before I go on, let me just say that for those of you who are new, the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. And knowing that people tend to get things wrong, but also people tend to get things wrong deliberately when they talk about it. And it's up to us to have true dialogue, just like what I'm going to be talking about today on the variety of things that we have to deal with our community. And one of the things that has to deal with our community is in how we maximize our $1.2 trillion spending capacity. And yes, that's what I just said. According to a survey done by the Nielsen people, and article I read in Fortune magazine a couple of months ago, which put me on this discussion, is that the spending power of people of African descent yearly, right now in the 21st century, 2019, is $1.2 trillion. That's how much we spend. During Black Fridays, Christmas, birthdays, and all kinds of things. We have that kind of spending. But last week I started with an image of wildebeest. Y'all familiar with these? They look, yeah, there it is, these wildebeest. And they look powerful. 1.2, but they are a metaphor for that $1.2 trillion I'm talking about. But what you see there is a bunch of millions of these wildebeest just chomping away, consuming, just like we do with that 1.2. There's no strategy to defend that money. There's no strategy to build anything. They just consume. And in this society, every group, every creature works as a team. In fact, when they're going across on their yearly migration, the wildebeest, other animals know that it's feeding time. Every Black Friday, other groups know that it's feeding time for our wealth. That $1.2 trillion go into other groups' pocket, and they build their communities, whereas our communities are left impoverished. Only out of $1, every dollar that is produced in the Black community, out of that $1.2 trillion, only 5 cents stays within the community. All right? In other communities, Jewish communities, multiple dollars and multiple times circulate because all groups create a market. And that market is found within their community when they establish themselves here in America. Okay, I don't care what kind of ethnic group and who came through Ellis Island, they always form as a team, as a group. They supported each other, not just consume, they produce. So if you want to find, once you got off the ship on Ellis Island and you wanted to find something that is kosher, if you're a Jewish, coming from the Eastern Europe, you will know there's a community in New York City, okay, right on the other side of that Statue of Liberty where you could go find kosher foods, part of your culture. You can find the type of outfit. If you're a Hasidic Jew, you can find a clothier who will make the proper outfits for you because he knows you culturally. That's the markets. That's what you're supposed to do. We as people of African descent go outside our community. And we started doing that. What's one of the after effects of what happened with integration in the 1960s. We didn't have another plan. You know, people don't realize that the jobs that we got, what happened after integration in the 1960s is that we didn't get a strategy for wealth, ownership, owning properties. We used to have that, in the early part of the 1800s, the latter part of the 1800s and the early part of the 1900s, or the early part of the 20th century, but the political powers that were arrayed against us, we didn't have no strategy or came as a group. We were just like those wildebeests. We allowed the hyena pack to feed off us. We allowed the lion pack to feed off us. We allowed the wild dogs. When we crossed the river to get on the other side, we have the crocodiles came in packs. Everybody came and fed off our wealth or destroyed our wealth like they did it in Rosewood or Tulsa, Oklahoma. When we did do those kind of things, we didn't have the network of systems that supported each other, and everybody had a different point of view and tried to do various different things. Even to this day, we still need to maximize, in order to our economic power, in order to deal with the realities of today's political system. Politics is a team sport, okay? Economics is a team sport. Everything that deals with a group in America to bring power is done as a group and as a team. This rugged individual thing that we were told and bought into, do my own thing, I'm my own person. No group has done that. We're the only one who bought into that during the the civil rights movement, and we got to deal with that, reassess, what we did wrong about that during that period of time. I got some things, quotes I would like to for you to read along with me. This is what I was talking about when I said about the $1 trillion. Today, even with $1 trillion in buying power for the African Americans, there's still a difference between income and wealth. Okay, income is an index of consumption. We all have jobs. That 1.2 trillion is based on income. But we have to go outside our community and to another person's community and ask them for the jobs in which they pay us. And once they pay you, they have your soul. Wealth is based on ownership. So when we're talking about, when we brag about the $1.3 trillion in buying power, we're like those wildebeests. We're just consuming. And everybody's feeding off us. Until you have wealth, in other words, you own the property. You own the buildings in your community. You store the wealth in your community. In other words, you have black banks like we used to have in the 1920s in Tulsa. We have black grocery stores. All these things form a market. And if you have a market, then if you're a young person, if you build a business, then you can hire the youth within your community, okay? Then you could have a market where they will learn to spend within their community. That's how we grew a Tulsa or Richmond or communities in Detroit or communities in Chicago. What we traded for when we integrated and started leaving the communities, we just ended up with neighborhoods. Neighborhoods is only a place where you eat and sleep, okay? So a black neighborhood today is not the same as a black community. A black community is a place where you, like I say, store your wealth, where you deal with the politics based on the wealth, using that wealth within your community. It's where you maintain your cultural and your historical identity. And you build businesses, and then those businesses, you can hire the youth from that community that look like you so that they can also go on to get better education. That's what a community is. If you don't have those type of activities, then you're just a neighborhood. Then you go into somebody else's community who has that, and they'll hire you, or again, they'll fire you. So you got to understand this thing. One thing I also want to, let's go on with another quote that I want to also bring about. Today, African Americans mostly consume and buy mainly to affirm who we are or think we are. In other words, the cars we drive, the homes we live in, how much we make, etc., which has nothing to do with wealth, which is owning the means of production. So we got this belief that because I got the baddest car, or because because I lived in this particular house, who owns those houses? Who produces those cars? You know, there were black-owned car companies in the early part of the 1900s that built cars that were owned by black people. Where are they now? So just the fact that you consume and can afford a car or can afford a house, and you can't use the term black community because we're not producing those things. Other people are. And it could be a problem if you listen to what's going on today in the politics of today. When you hear certain type of conservatives talking about we need to shrink the government, and then you have these corporate entities moving overseas. Okay, if you are dependent on income, then that person, that group, that ownership has your soul. Let me bring this point out when we talk about that. Okay, and this is what I'm trying to say. As a people, if we continue to allow another group to impose an image of what is normal for them, of who we are, contrary to who we are, you've seen the problem that black men or black women, especially black women, when they bring their braids style into corporate America, and they're told that it's too, they're told that they can't bring that kind of, they can't wear that, which is who we are. And we tend to consume to maintain that image. In other words, they produce the image by what they project or allow to be projected in magazines of what a black person is supposed to look like, okay? And then we want to be hip and up to date. So in order to look like that image that's produced by another group and about who we are, who tell us that our hair, it looks too ghetto when you go for a job in corporate America. You better not wear no braids, or you better not look this way, or wear clothes, or if our hair grows naturally, that's not an executive look. Who says that? But if you control the production or you control the jobs, they will tell you how you must look. And in order for you to maintain that look that is falsely produced by another group, you have to spend money. And where are you going to get it? Who produce? So the same people who are telling you the image that you should project are the same people who produce the products that you have to buy and maintain their power over you. That's the problem. That's the trick bag when you only deal with income and not wealth. Our total wealth, again, what we had in 1860 with black folks was comparable with the population of 1860, total population, comparable to the total population. We were still 14% back then, and we're 13, 14% today. And the total wealth that we own of the American economy is 1/2 of 1%. It was the same in 1860, and it's the same today. Radio stations that we might own today, to use an example. We used to have radio stations in almost every black community back in the day. We had our own DJs, our own radio station. We could hire, we had our own gas stations. We had our own grocery stores. We had our own lawyers and doctors' offices, and we could hire from within our community. We had modeled the possibilities for our youth. Now that we no longer have true communities where you store your wealth, build your businesses like black banks and black grocery stores, and maintain your culture. You don't care if a sister has braids when she comes to work, because that's part of who we are, and you recognize it, and she can walk with pride to work without having to have to deal with the complaints of those who don't understand our culture, but who produces the jobs. And they could tell us who we are, where we go, what time we got to go, what time we got to get up, how many hours we're going to work, and they get the profits, all right? And they get the higher paying jobs, and we get the workers, work level jobs. For example, today, the unemployment rate is supposedly be around 4%, which is good, sounds good, and I'm sure you've heard many people talk about it. But you got to understand, if you don't understand economics and how the economics work, that 4% is only based on the unemployment, people who are on, they count the people who are on, who's getting the unemployment insurance for 4 weeks, and then they track those people who are actually looking for jobs. And then they divide one with the other and multiply it by 100. And every month, the Bureau of Labor Statistics do this monthly. That's a government entity. And from that, they get these, monthly. The first Friday of each month, they will produce this. Well, the national rate is 4% or 3%. You hear all these politicians crowing about how they brought the unemployment rate down, but that's a trick. Okay, if you're not getting an unemployment check, like you find many of our black people in these neighborhoods, no longer communities, because there's no jobs, there's no wealth, there's no ownership, and you got all this regentrification people coming in, kicking out neighborhoods. With the unemployment rate in places like Detroit or certain neighborhoods in New York or certain neighborhood in Camden, New Jersey is maybe 36%. Okay, the unemployment rate nationally, based on the calculation of the Bureau of Labor Statistics every month, diluted out based on who's getting a check every month from the government and who's able to look for jobs. But if you just got out of prison, where a lot of our young black men are, they're not going to be counted. If you've been out of work for 2 years, can't find jobs, all these jobs that went overseas, that black people used to depend on these jobs. Not only a lot of these jobs are going overseas from these corporate entities now. Do you know that many of the after the Civil Rights Act and integration kicked in and affirmative action kicked in, majority of the jobs that made black people, at least for the last 40 years, 50 years, enter into the middle class that we forgot, was government jobs. About 60% of the jobs that was of black America went into the government. I'm talking like federal jobs, state jobs, county jobs, city jobs, libraries and teaching and stuff like that. So mostly with government. The other, from the 60% to the other 28 or 26 to 28% was going into corporate America. Everybody got jobs in like Verizon and Apple or wherever you might be working now. You're working for some kind of corporation. Majority of black people and those who made it to the middle class was basically government job. Not wealth, not ownership, but we just got to be able to, and that's where we get this 1.2 trillion. We are employees, but we're employees of other people. If you're listening to the conservatives, the Republicans, what are they saying? They want to downsize. We got too much government. Well, guess who's going to be affected drastically? That's 60%. Who, if they look what happened when they shut down the government last year in 2018 for a month, almost 2 months. People, you know, there's the old adage: most people were about 2 or 3 paychecks from having some very serious financial problem, and America almost was brought to its knees, especially with these government employees who were very worried after a month of not getting paid. They almost didn't make it. If they went into a second month, who knows what the economy would be like. And that's just out of a whim of the individual that we currently have in the White House, who doesn't know what he's doing. But again, if you allow if you don't have no economic stability, power, that you could control the politicians who will then work for you because you're going to support their campaigns. That's what other groups are doing. They pool their wealth. They back certain politicians who then produce policies that benefits them, or and they also produce the kind of judges that's going to have favorable decisions for that particular group. Everything is a team sport. Politics, the economics, the criminal justice system are all team sports. And if we go around thinking that we can only do things as like the wildebeest individuals, everybody else is going to feed for us. And that's why we haven't gained anything and in our ownership for the last, 150 years, if you want to go back to, the end of the Civil War. We just got out of enslavement, where we donated 246 years of our labor from 1619 to 1865. Then you had another 99 years, almost 100 years, from 1865 to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Okay, and if you want to include the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and then the 1968 Housing Act. So, but we had to be giving these rights, even though we're supposedly under the same Constitution. But if you don't understand the game, if you don't understand how this system works, and if you don't understand that you are all competing for pieces of the pie, interest groups, that's what they call them, interest groups. And in politics, it's one interest group fighting with another interest group, different interest groups, just like a war. Everybody, it said politics is war without bloodshed, and war is nothing more than politics with bloodshed. The same type of effect. If you want to have a artillery shell go off in a shooting war, and a neighborhood and a community is destroyed by bombs and shells, the same type of community, if you look at some of these communities in the Rust Belt, they look like they've been in a war. It just took a little while with the political wars about who gets what. Economics is who gets what. Let me just go on with the few minutes that I have. I just want to bring up some of these other points about the community. Again, on the last show, I brought this image up, and it's a structure that indicates what a community should be based on. The bottom floor, the foundation, should be the economics. The second floor represents the politics of the community. The third floor represents the court systems. The fourth floor represents the media and the communication system. And the fifth floor, that represents education. You don't want to put education first. It'll never, at the foundation, it'll be crushed or ignored by the politics, by the media, if you don't have economic wealth. This is a capitalist system. This is what was established in 1789 when they created the Constitution. It was a political capitalistic system. You use the economics of your community to pool the wealth, to control the politicians, to support the best person who will work for you, and you vote and you use your economics as a block, not as individuals, as a voting block, as an economic block. And then you make the politician go up to the third floor where the court system, and then you make sure that they follow the laws, or or you make sure that if you're the mayor and you tell the police chief you better take a check on your police officers because we got a community with wealth that is supporting me. They don't like how you're treating our young black men at police stops, or et cetera. Okay. And then the media, and then, of course, the educational system. If you don't have that structure in your communities, you just have a neighborhood. And a neighborhood is where you just eat and sleep, and then you go to somebody else's community where they have those structures, where they have the businesses, where they have where you can get the jobs, where they have the banks, where the money, instead of going into your community, is staying in their community. You got to understand this is how this society works. You need to have a research. We got all these educated black colleges. Why don't we have our think tanks? There are about 3,000 or 4,000 think tanks for the conservative movement alone. And what they do, they come up with strategies. And then they disseminate it amongst all the conservative groups that permeates throughout the country. We should have grassroots people who have the energy, the young, who these grassroots organizations, they should be getting information from these black think tanks who will come up with strategies that will benefit that particular community. You have strategies for local communities, should have state strategies, you should have national strategies that we could pick up at the grassroots and organize at the grassroots level. Pool our wealth. Vote as a block. You don't have to be a Democrat or Republican, just as a black political party. And just like other groups did, we will vote for you, Mr. Democrat, but you got to make sure that you do these particular policies that'll benefit the black community, not only locally, if it's a city block, or nationally or statewide. We got to work as a group, as a pack. We got to feed off the other groups. Not just like the wildebeest, you got all these other groups feeding off us, even though we are generating only income, $1.2 trillion. What you gonna do with that? So until next time, peace, Hotep, bye-bye.